I see so many people get it 100% wrong on the concept of free speech. It's not that difficult to really understand, but with years and years of media propaganda, politicians, pundits who have misused this word, I can see why people are confused. And there are people from multiple like political affiliations and philosophical backgrounds that get this dangerously wrong. And I say dangerously because it's very important to understand what this term implies. If you understand this, you can understand everything else, and maybe we can work towards a freer and more voluntary society. For starters, let me explain what an actual right is, because this is where so many people get it fundamentally wrong. The only legitimate rights are these negative rights, and that means that these rights do not require a violation of somebody else's rights for them to exist. They are inherent in every single individual existing as a human being. The important thing to note is that the government does not grant rights. You may have questions as to how they are protected without government, but the rights exist regardless of what the government says. And I'm an anarchist, but even your beloved American founders understood at least that if you read the language of the Declaration of Independence and the preamble to the Constitution. So a lot of people misspeak when they see injustices. For example, in many countries, women are oppressed, and quite often this is sanctioned by the government. Some people will say women don't have certain rights in those countries. This is a critical error, as it's not that they don't have the rights, it's that their rights are being impeded upon or they're being violated. It sounds like a silly hair to split, but it's really important actually. The fact that the rights predates the state and is inherent is how we can dictate what is right or just. I hate to use an extreme example, but it's a way people understand it. Forcing someone to have sex with you that does not want to have sex with you is rape, and thus a violation of one's rights. If the government made rape legal, it is still rape and still a violation of that person's rights. The fact that we can recognize this wrongdoing highlights how the rights predate the state. As another example, when I say I'm against the state considering it is the biggest violator of rights, some people would claim that without the state, these rights don't exist. What you're actually meaning to say is that you don't see a way those rights are protected without the state. The rights exist regardless of what the state says, and this is so very, very important. And this is why libertarians like myself express that all rights are property rights. First one starting with self-ownership, that is, you own yourself and therefore your body. And every tangible like private property in terms of ownership is something that you obtained via voluntary exchange or homestead and first use. And by voluntary exchange, we're talking about scarce resources with rightful previous owners of that private property in terms of that voluntary exchange. If you want to figure out whether or not something violates someone's rights, base it on that understanding. What is assault? It's a violent bodily invasion. What is theft? It's taking someone's property without their consent. So what does this mean about the quote unquote right to free speech? There's no such thing. Now, it would make more sense if people simply use this as a term to mean that the state does not have the right to punish someone simply because of what they said alone. Still, that's a little bit wonky, but that will make more sense. But unfortunately, there are a lot of people that signal to their right to free speech when they see things like Twitter or YouTube censoring and removing people from their platform. People, including like conservatives, get this dangerously wrong. It is very well within their right to kick people off of their platform and limit your speech, that is. That does not mean that you have to just take it, as in you really can complain about it to others, of course. That's how markets work, and this sometimes leads to change in those policies by way of those platforms. But they are not violating your rights by deciding what is permissible on like their own website. So multiple sides get this wrong. The side that loves to deplatform will suggest that you can't complain, right? And then the side that gets deplatformed says they are having their rights violated, and both are fundamentally incorrect. Now, we can go down that rabbit hole expressing how big some of these platforms are, the fact that some of them get money from the state, work with the state, work with these politicians, but those are problems in itself and different problems. Nonetheless, the owner gets to decide what speech is allowable on his or her property. This is why there's no such thing as a right to free speech. If I own a movie theater and the rules state that being loud and disruptive during the movie could get you physically removed from my property, that movie theater I own, you do not get to fall back on free speech if you break this rule and I kick your ass out. You can protest with your dollar or word of mouth, but no matter how stupid you think the rules are, that's their right to make it on their own property. I've served suspensions and multiple bans on multiple platforms, but notice I never say that it's not within their right to make that decision. It is within their right to do it. I just think that some of those rules are stupid. It's called consistency, but contracts are very important to property rights, be it written, understood, or verbal agreements. So many of the folks that complain about being deplatformed by some of these websites should not fall back on this phantom right to free speech. Instead, should look for the language in their agreements, like the terms of service. Sometimes the platform is not holding their end of the contract with inconsistent application, but that's entirely different from quote unquote free speech. So what I'm saying is, there's no such thing as an absolute right to free speech. There are private property rights and only private property rights. So I'll leave you with this excerpt from Murray Rothbard's The Ethics of Liberty, such a great read. Freedom of speech is supposed to mean the right of everyone to say whatever he likes. But the neglected question is, where? Where does a man have this right? He certainly does not have it on property on which he is trespassing. In short, he has this right only either on his own property or on the property of someone who has agreed as a gift or in a rental contract to allow him on the premises. In fact, then, there is no such thing as a separate right to free speech. There is only a man's property right, the right to do as he wills with his own or to make voluntary agreements with other property owners.